Hey guys, welcome to Reddit Brew. Today, I will be reading from the r/entitledpeople subreddit, so let's jump into it. Karen accused me of stealing my own car, tricked a dumb cop into arresting me. Now, my car is a wreck because he gave her the keys. I really don't care who believes this, but here's my story. I live in one of those middle of nowhere desert towns where almost everyone knows almost everyone, and it's hot as hell, but dirt cheap to buy a home or land in. It's not uncommon for old cars to last out here, as they almost never rust, and people keep fixing them. After high school, I worked my arse off at a local job to get my own place. I ended up buying a small plot of land with a trailer on it, off of a local guy that decided he was gonna move to Texas. 10 years have gone by since then. For a while, I spent a lot of my time tinkering with an old 87 Monte Carlo that I bought super cheap as it was without an engine or transmission. I loved that car because an older cousin of mine had one when I was a kid and I always wanted one of my own. I spent 2 years fixing up the one I got with help from some friends and finished it in 2019. Since the engine was missing, I dropped in a junkyard Chevy 305 V8 that was connected to a rebuild 4-speed automatic transmission with low miles from a totaled car. Then I painted it myself inside a friend's garage with a Harbor Freight sprayer and some GM black single-stage gloss paint and buffed it to a shine. I finished it up with some gold Monte Carlo decals and some classic moon rims I bought from the local junkyard and polished up. I also partially redid the interior by replacing the seats and put in a custom steering wheel. I'm not really a mechanic, but my friends all helped me. Online how-to videos on my smartphone really helped as well. The car was fun to drive and looked good. I kept it in good order. That is, until this mess went down. Now, I didn't really trust some of the local law enforcement out here before, and this gave me even more reason not to. A lot of the cops around here are barely qualified for the job. They are practically hired with a handshake and just told to play Doom for training. Granted though, many of them are really nice. The sheriff is even kind of a friend of mine. He's really only one of the competent ones there though. Most of the rest really don't do their jobs very well, especially whenever a new one gets hired on. Such as a guy that went out of his way to move to my town just to be a cop easily. In this case, he is the nephew of the sheriff. He even brought his own Crown Vic with a loudspeaker to drive around town in. Let's call this guy Dumb Nephew Cop, or DC for short. DC and I didn't know each other personally yet, but he made his presence known. He was dumb as a rock and high on his own ego. He was like if Barney Fife and John Cena had an illegitimate son together because he was a tall, strong-looking man that was always giving people creepy looks. He patrolled on foot up and down Main Street with a clipboard in hand and a big grin on his face. He also liked to publicly flex his muscles in front of people. One Saturday morning, I took my Monte Carlo out to meet a friend. He ended up bailing because of a last-minute issue with his girlfriend. I thought, meh, no problem. I'll just get some fast food and go home. I went to the local burger place and got a meal to go. As I was walking out, there was a lady outside looking over my car. She was bent over in a very short skirt. Not gonna lie, I enjoyed the view. It wasn't uncommon for people to ask about my car, and I usually don't mind talking as long as they are polite. However, this woman ended up being anything but. She was curvy and quite good looking. I'm guessing early to mid-30s or so. I asked her if she liked my car. She stood up, took one look at me, and snickered. I asked her what was so funny. To get an idea of what I looked like at the time, I was a skinny guy with a scraggly beard and was wearing a faded AC/DC t-shirt with the sleeves ripped off, along with worn-out cut-off denim shorts and flip-flops. I guess she figured I was poor or something, so she was most likely judging my appearance. She looked me up and down in a very obvious way, then said, "There's no way this is your car. You couldn't possibly afford something this nice." Now, I have a tendency to get sarcastic or snide when people make assumptions about me, so I said back, "Oh, really, lady? The title is in my name, and these keys right here in my hand say I'm the owner too." The Karen just glared at me as I put the keys in the lock and began to open the door. I looked behind her and noticed a beige 90s Volvo with a missing headlight with out-of-state plates on it, parked not far from me. I put two and two together and laughed. "Let me guess, lady, that's your car over there?" She started to turn beet red. I laughed and said, "Oh, don't be ashamed. Those things aren't lookers, but they'll run forever." I figured this was over, but as I was opening my car door, I suddenly felt her nails digging into my shoulder. She was screeching so loud, my ears were hurting. Before I could turn around, she kicked me between my legs from behind with a high-heeled shoe so hard that I collapsed in agony. And, just my luck, dumb cop drove right up because, I assume, he'd heard her screeching from down the street during his noon patrol. As soon as dumb cop was out of his car, the Karen ran to him crying and saying that I was a carjacker that was attempting to take her new car. I wasn't looking at either of them as I was on the ground wincing in a fetal position from pain. The next thing I heard was DC yelling, "Put your hands behind your back!" Then I was promptly being pinned down by his knee on my spine and forcibly cuffed. I tried telling DC that I knew his uncle and can prove that I am the real owner of the car, but he just ignored me, calling me white trash and to shut up. He then picked my keys up off the ground and actually handed them to Karen. He did a smug hero pose while she gave me a shit-eating grin. No matter what I said, DC wasn't listening to me, and he fully believed her. I had to see Karen start up my car and drive off with it, while handcuffed, unable to do anything about it. My heart sank as I watched it sail down the road with her flipping me off. Dumb cop drug me back to the sheriff's office. I'd hoped to God his uncle was in, but just my luck yet again, he was out for lunch. DC put me in the cell and told me to keep quiet. I was pissed, but I knew being mad and arguing with this idiot wasn't going to get me anywhere, so I just compliantly waited. During that time, DC kept giving me looks of contempt. At one point, he tried to be intimidating as he walked across the cell with a nightstick, grazing it against each bar like he was guarding Alcatraz. At least an hour went by, and the sheriff finally came in through the door, happily nursing a big gulp soda. However, he froze the second he saw me. "OP, what are you doing here?" I was about to speak when DC jumped in and said, "I caught this lowlife creep trying to steal a lady's car, so I hauled him in." That's when I finally got my chance to speak and said, "Yeah, only it was my car." DC just rolled his eyes and told his uncle not to listen to me. The sheriff silenced him and asked my full story. As I tried to tell it, DC was making dismissive looks and kept repeatedly interrupting until the sheriff finally told him to sit down and shut up. When I was finally able to say everything that happened, he was furious. The sheriff laid into DC, who was cowering in a chair, saying that it indeed was my car, and he stupidly gave my keys to a thief that had assaulted me. DC started frantically apologizing, stating that he was just trying to help. The sheriff called him an idiot that just wanted to play hero by saving a damsel in distress, and now the whole department will be in hot water for his unlawful arrest and physical assault against me. I then got let out of the cell, got some ice for my crotch, and got taken home. The sheriff and DC went back to the burger restaurant, and the Karen's car was no longer there. They got the CCTV footage from the camera the restaurant had looking outside. It caught everything minus the audio. The Karen came back riding piggyback with a guy on a motorcycle over a half hour from the time she left with my car. She blew him a kiss and then drove off in her Volvo. The sheriff scrambled everyone, even DC, to try and chase her down, but they couldn't find her as she'd already driven out of the county lines. Some phone calls were made to other departments to look for her. I had to sit at home with an ice pack on my crotch all evening, waiting for news on what happened. A couple days later, my car was found just a few miles out of town. The Karen had broken all of the windows, then put the car in neutral and let it coast down a deep rocky hill, which rolled it into the bottom ditch, which smashed the front end and warped the frame. It was completely totaled. I wanted to cry from the sound of metal grinding on rock as the tow truck pulled it back up. Dumb cop was there too, and he couldn't even look at me the entire time. The cherry on top was that my insurance didn't cover theft, so the sheriff's office was made to pay me the value of my Monte Carlo instead, since DC caused this. It was only about $5,000, but that was honestly close to what I had into it, since I did almost all the work myself. DC also paid me another $2,000 as an apology, and said it was most of his savings. The Karen was caught at a motel a state over sometime later and was arrested for soliciting prostitution and drug possession. Grand Theft Auto was just one of many things she was charged with. I got on a video call just to see her in court and testify. She looked like a wreck the whole time because she knew she was screwed. It wasn't long before she was pronounced guilty. She got 10 years behind bars with no possibility of parole. As for Dumb Cop, the sheriff all but begged me not to sue him because he was his nephew and he promised his sister he'd look out for the guy. I'm not a sue-happy person, so I let it go, provided DC actually takes some sort of course on how to do his job properly. So the incident was more or less rug swept, and DC was demoted to sitting at a desk all day, answering phones. And they would also be docking part of his pay until every penny was paid back. He still works the desk currently, and still avoids me anytime I'm near him. Arguably, he's a better cop now though, because of the incident, and has significantly mellowed out. As for me, it took some time, but with help, I finally located a replacement Monte Carlo project car with a clean title. It's the same year too. I salvaged as many parts as I could from my old one and used it all in the build. The engine and transmission were still good, and somehow, so were most of the base parts. The sheriff personally came by to help my friends and I build the new car in his downtime. It took a year, but I've got a fresh-looking Monte Carlo that looks just like my old one. You'd never know they weren't the same car. I've made sure to have better insurance this time around, and if a Karen comes near my car ever again, I'm peeling out of there as fast as I can. Wow, that cop is an idiot. This story honestly made my heart sink. All that dumb cop had to do was ask for OP's registration, and this whole thing would have been avoided. It's officers like this that are the reason that some people don't trust cops. One of my biggest pet peeves is when someone refuses to listen to both sides of a story and immediately discriminates against one person. As an officer especially, you're supposed to go into it being unbiased, not immediately giving the keys to a chick because she's hot. I was honestly ready to be so mad and say sue his ass immediately, but it does genuinely seem like the nephew learned his lesson and feels remorseful. And I'm glad they demoted him and made him responsible of making up the cost of the totaled car. I'm also glad Karen got caught and is now behind bars. A happy ending for sure, but great googly moogly. That one raised my blood pressure. But anyways, that is all from me today. I hope that story didn't make you rage too hard. Please leave a like and subscribe if you want. I truly appreciate when you do, and I will see you in the next Reddit story. Bye!